we are in the interview program. I still remember the phone call from Norman Rich asked me to join him to do the project. At that time, I think about history, and I think one person I really want to have interview is Mr. Maloney. You have been with us for a long time. You know the history well. You have worked with I don't know how many presidents. And I recently asked Bill to send me his CV. He said, I don't have any CV. I think he's the only one that doesn't need a CV. Well, in order to get to know him a little bit, so I just read a little piece of writing from Bill about how he became in this business. Bill is a graduate of Harvard College, not bad, class of 1955, served in Korean War, and he didn't need a CV because he worked with his father. When he finished, he just stepped into it. His father is a public relationship business. That's what the PRRI came from, I believe. Mm-hmm. And Bill worked on that, and I think his relationship with us started with Alan Carroll, who in 1975.
It was probably 74, 75. Alan
introduced him to us.
Yeah.
And that started the relationship. From there on, Bill has been the executive director. He has worked with many presidents. He is the advisor, facilitator, a confidant, and most important, is a friend. Bill is honest, straightforward. You suggest something to him, he doesn't think is any good, he will tell you. I enjoy the time when I was a president and working with Bill together. In fact, I get exposed to him when I was appointed as a recorder. And I still remember those days to learn from Bill. Bill, I'm glad you're here today. I got a couple questions I want to ask you. Recently, we have made a DVD on the history of the Society for Vascular Surgery. The DVD is based on 68 interviews that we did with Norman and Roger and the group called the History Project Work Group. We used all these interviews. We took about 49 clips of video and make a history tape, and I would like to have your opinion on the DVD. It's 2 hours, 40 minutes long. We have a history of 67 some years. Try to show it in 2 hours and 40 some minutes. There will be omissions. I know that. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, we have a lot of very interesting data that we collect. And we put this together. We'd like to have you to give me some suggestions, critiques, and I'm looking forward to hear from you because you know the history so well. Yeah.
Well, Jimmy, thank you very much, and for your kind words. Most of them I wrote for you, so I can understand that you put them into the oral sense. I spent the 2 hours and 40 minutes going through your video. We have, in my checkered career, been involved in videos of other organizations. trying to put together a history. And I think yours is a very much more complete than most. You've actually sort of broken it up into two segments. The first is the scientific side of things, where you have a number of people discussing procedures that they have either originated or they've brought to the fore. And this I think is unique because you also have a history which is still living. In a number of organizations that history is lost because the individuals are no longer with you. I think that 2 hours and 40 minutes is too long a single piece. If I had any recommendation, I'd recommend that you divide it up into two distinct parts. You talk at the beginning about Era 1 and Era 2, but there really is a scientific part, and then there's an administrative or management part. And I enjoyed listening to the scientific part, but didn't understand most of what they were saying. And the management part, I think that you've caught the major aspects of it, the development of your journal, with Dr. DeBakey planning to go and start another journal, and I remember sitting in that room when it was decided that we would go with Mosby, with whom I'd done a fair amount of business on the cardiothoracic side, and I think that supporting Dr. DeBakey as editor was a very wise move, and it enabled him to become the founding editor, and then you had the workmen got into the thing and developed that publication. I vividly recall the meeting that Jim Stanley talks about in terms of the Board of Vascular Surgery. I was with Bob Smith, who was then president, in Atlanta, and met with Tom Rhodes, the attorney, that was to do that ultimately was the one who incorporated the board. And we went to that meeting at the Admirals Club in Chicago on my Admirals Club card. And when they decided that, yes, we do want to do it, I recall vividly calling Tom Rhodes from that meeting and telling him to go ahead. You know, we're going to have a board of vascular surgery. Go ahead and incorporate it. But I think that kind of aspect is so different from the scientific part on the front. And you understand, I'm not a science person, so I think it would almost be worthwhile to divide it into two 1-hour sessions rather than one 2 hour and 40-minute session. I think that the involvement of others in the questioning was very, very good. Most organizations don't allow a Dr. Gregory or Dr. Rich to yourself to be the interlocutor, if you will. And they have a professional who asks the questions, and then they just get the face and the response of the individual. So I think by involving more people, you'll involve more audience in that. But I think you've done as you usually do, Dr. Yao, an excellent job. Good. That's all I have to say about your video.
Little bit of levity is always good. The figures just came out. Harvard took 5.9% of the applicants into the admission class this year. Stanford only took 5.1%, and so there's a big back and forth. How hard was it to get into Harvard, Bill?
It was interesting because at my 25th reunion, I they brought us into a major theater, and they said, let us tell you about this year's class. And so that would have been 1980. Harvard had umpteen thousand applicants, from which it then included Radcliffe, and it accepted, of the umpteen thousand, it accepted 2,000, 1,800, something like that. And you could just feel the room with these frogs just blowing up, where aren't we the smart ones? And then it said, then they said, well, let us tell you about your class. And we sat down, and they said, in your class, there was no Radcliffe, so that the acceptance rate was only 12. There were only 12 or 1,300 people they'd accept. And what we had for applications was something like 8,000, from which we accepted 25%. And you could just feel the air go out of the room, because, and it's interesting because when I applied to Harvard, my high school principal called me down one day and said, I see you've applied to Harvard. And I said, yes. I was 17 years old. And he said, where else have you applied? And I said, nowhere. And he said, what will happen if they don't accept you? And I said, why wouldn't they? Had no idea whatsoever. So he said, well, I have this school in upstate New York which wants to offer you a football scholarship, and I think you might want to apply there. So I talked to the people. The recruiting office was there, and I filled out an application. And I was telling a girl that I was dating at the time, her father, about this thing. And he said, well, where is the school? And I said, well, I don't really know. And he said, doesn't that answer your question? So fortunately, they accepted me. But
well, built on that, the one thing we really have appreciated over all the years is your contribution to our effort. And as you know, doctors aren't the best with finances, and you always have had good financial advice for us over the years, and good advice and many other things. And if I may, and knowing that Dr. Yao wants some history, one thing I'd like to make sure we get in this series is the beginning of the Industrial Advisory Committee. Mm-hmm. And this goes back to the Joint Council, and you mentioned Dr. Callow getting Bill involved. And Dr. Callow on the Joint Council in the mid-1970s was saying that we needed some guidance. And you may remember the little story that was told at that time. In 1975 at the ISCBS in Edinburgh, we took a photograph of a group of people, Wiley Barker, Andy Dale, and there was an international businessman who was going to do what Bill later did for us. The only problem was he was an international bandit. So we were really smarting.
They both begin with B.
No, we were really smarting when you came with us, I think, to Zurich in 1978 for the European American Venus Symposium that we had. And we asked you to help us with that, too. The other part of this, just beautiful, we said, well, we want to have the meeting in Cancun next in 1980. And Bill came back and he said, they haven't really built the hotels yet. You'd be sitting in the sand, We said, well, no, that's not quite what we had in mind. So we went to Acapulco. But what I'm getting around to is that with Lionel Villavicencio being the local host and me having the responsibility because Andy Dale assigned me to have the responsibility, we had to turn to Bill and we said, we're really in financial trouble with this meeting because we have 210 participants, and they're all international leaders from around the world, but we don't have any audience.
Way to go.
Yeah, we don't, and we don't know what we're going to do. And with George Johnson and a few other people, we met with Bill and we said, well, let's see if we can get the competitors to realize that if we're successful, they'll all sell more product. So we got Carolyn Jobst and Bill Gunther and a few other people, and you helped sway them. And we told them that if they would be our industrial advisory panel, we would stay out of jail and we'd be able to go home. And that really worked. And I think that was kind of the origin of the industrial advisory panels. But please, Bill.
Well, the thing is that people on my side of the street, the business side of the street, can have all of these wonderful ideas and everything, but we don't buy anything. And without the involvement of the purchaser, we can do nothing. So that it was very important that you and others got involved in this and talked to industry, which brought industry around. It was interesting with the joint meeting of the SVS and North American chapter of ISCVS. Over the years, it was one of the best meetings for industry, because when the vascular papers came on, all the cardiac people went to the hall. And when the cardiac people, all the vascular people went. So there was always somebody in the hall. And I thought, boy, that's what we have to do.
Well, to end the story on the International Bandit, and the reason we know he was, I had a little Canon, what we called a half-frame camera that I'd had in Vietnam with me, and I always carried that. So we got the doorman at the big Caledonian Hotel in Edinburgh to take a picture of the group of us.
Okay.
About 2 years later, I got a call from the CIA, and they said, Doctor, we understand that you have a photograph of a group in Edinburgh, yes sir, type of thing. May we borrow it? And I said, yes sir, and I gave it to them. And about a week later, they called me back and they said, Interpol is extremely grateful to you for that photograph, because they said they've been chasing this guy all over Europe, and they'd never been able to catch up with him because nobody knew what he looked like. So one of the things we've always said when we take group pictures at our university is, if you have anything you're concerned about, get out of the picture, because this may end up in the hands of CIA and Interpol. But
For sure.
Come back to the beginning. How Alan Carroll get involved with?
Alan Callow was very much involved with the two of our client organizations, one being the New England Surgical Society and the other being the Massachusetts chapter of the college. And through that, we had worked with him for several years. And I think he was president of both. But that's that was when he came and said, I have this group that might do a little good, and the first meeting we were involved in was, and I'm not sure of the year, but it was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and
1976.
was it 76?
Yes.
And Sterling Edwards was responsible for local things, and it was really a very fine meeting, and that was followed up by one in Rochester, New York.
Right,
and when you think of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Rochester, New York, and now you think of the size of your meeting, and the way it
76.
was it 76?
Yeah.
Okay. But the thing, just one quick aside on the Sterling Edwards one, was he had a reception out at his home.
Yeah.
And we had the Sandia Peaks over the thing, and he had his residents who hadn't finished surgery yet hang glide from the top of the peak down to his pool, and these kids were just sky high. I mean, they were so worked up, and they came hurtling down. It was like something out of the movies, but it was really a great event, and he was a great guy.
Well, Bill, you run the joint council meeting for a long time.
Yes, sir.
Looking back, we have now merged the SVS, ISCVS. You think we should merge earlier, or what's your thought about it?
I don't know. It was interesting because, as you will remember, it used to be a two organization meeting, and that halfway through you changed the color of your badge. You had a yellow badge for one, you had a green badge for the other, and at the noon on Tuesday, or they closed the business on Monday, everybody would switch their badges so that they were at the right organization. As I recall, there was a lot of camaraderie between the two organizations, but it was obvious that Vascular was becoming the dominant force in the joint organization, and I think that when you were talking about the board and that kind of thing, it might have been worthwhile at that point. You had a journal. You were talking about a board. Why didn't you bring the thing together at that point? It was obvious to me and to us that the program was becoming more and more vascular, that the attendance was the cardiac attendance was dropping significantly, and it's sort of like the American Surgical, where they say there's no nobody in cardiac goes to the American Surgical anymore because they don't do any of those papers. I don't know whether they do that for vascular or not, whether you do many vasculars at American Surgical, but
Two.
yeah,
Very few.
yeah, it might have been worthwhile to have done it sooner. I think that the way you did it, and the involvement of Becky Marin, the departure from our organization, which I think was a very definite plus for the two societies, to have your own full-time staff, people you owned, was the right way to go. You come to a point where our model wasn't good for you.
The American Board of Vascular Surgery had become the very divisive issue for
Yes.
us.
Yes.
I mean, the whole society is just up for grab, and there's so much controversial argument, debate, and we have Jerry Goldstone here. When I make the tape, I use his conclusion to summarize the whole affair. Maybe, Jerry, you can say some word about the American Board of Vascular Surgery and what your final analysis.
I'm here to praise Maloney.
Keep it clean.
Well, I didn't have anything new to add. I think it was an important chapter in our history. I think it was certainly very divisive. What I thought characterized vascular surgery as a group in the early days was how small and friendly and cohesive it was. And I thought there was very little internecine warfare. I mean, there was competitiveness, of course, but this really created a big schism, and there are scars that have still not gone away. On the other hand, like many things in life, you have tough times and challenges, and you get through them. It makes you stronger, and so I think as a profession we're stronger for it. I think our strength in conjunction with the larger body of surgery is probably better than it would have been on our own. And so overall, as I think I said before, I think everybody came out ahead.
I recall the meetings with Wally Ritchie and the rest of the people at the American Board of Surgery, and there was no way that they wanted you to have a separate board. They wanted to keep you within the church, and it was fascinating to watch it evolve to just that, as part of overall surgery per se, rather than to be off there fighting a battle, which didn't have to be fought.
And I think, in fact, part of it was there was so much mystery of how the board did things, and we felt like it was almost like being a child. Your parents say, "Don't do that," or "Do that," and you say, "Well, why?" "Well, because I said so." And I think we never could find out why were these policies the way they were, and why wouldn't some of these things we asked for happen. I think that's what actually ultimately precipitated. People said, we've had enough.
Yeah, true.
I think also, Jerry, the fact that endovascular has become so important and dominant now in vascular surgery has clearly separated vascular from general surgery. Whereas in the past it was not so obvious. Don't you think that's
I think absolutely. And what's interesting to me now is we're looking at the 05 programs and trying to compare the graduates of those programs with those who have gone through the fellowship. And the comment from a lot of us was, gee, my training was superb. I wouldn't have traded my training for anything. But I don't think the general surgery residents are the same as they were in days gone past. I mean, they're all minimally invasive surgeons.
correct?
And so the world's changing, and I think fortunately our organization has changed along with the world, and I think it's okay.
It's interesting from my standpoint that we represent the American Association for Thoracic Surgery, and and have since the early 70s. And with that group, many of them did vascular surgery. I mean, many of your members of this organization were members of that organization, and now they, of course, are seeing the pressure of not being able to do vascular surgery, and are they trained for it? And I know that there have been meetings between the ATS and STS and SVS to try to resolve this issue, but it's just the cardiac surgeons aren't being trained the way they used to be trained, and so it's a much narrower field. But I'm going to have to erase that, or else I'll lose a client.
There is one other important historical footnote, Bill, for all of this, and the Rodney Dangerfield of vascular surgery as the venous side of things. And we did make the comment about the European American Venous Symposia, of which we had 5 meetings from the mid-1970s until 1990. Spawned off of that was the American Venous Forum, but Stanley Crawford was president of the SVS, and I'll always remember in the Joint Council, he looked at John Bergen and said, take Norm Rich and a couple of those other guys and go over in a corner and play with your venous problems. So we were really beside ourselves because we didn't know what to do. And our first proposal was, well, we'd like to have a day or a half a day tacked on to the ISCVS SVS. And of course the Joint Council said, absolutely no way. So we turned to Bill and we said, it looks like we're going to have to go our own way and have a separate organization. And Bill's answer was, you just don't have enough people involved to make it fiscally viable. Mm-hmm. And for the first 5 years of the American Venous Forum, it was really that way. But we appreciated your advice once again on that.
Well, it was another client. And it's a very, it will probably always be a sticky point, but it is what it is. And the American Board of Surgery, I think, did the right thing, and contrary to Dr. Veith, I think the Vascular Societies did the right thing.
I was told by Jim Stanley, the American Board of Vascular Surgery have an office in Chicago. Is that true?
I don't recall. I don't.
Well, Ben Munger's office was in Chicago, and he was the, I guess, a consultant. Really, is what he was for the American Board of Vascular Surgery. So it may be. I don't recall the details about it, but it may well be that his office was the official office.
It may have been that what you have as legal counsel, and I know was he a.
Well, the original lawyer was from Atlanta.
Yeah, Tom Rhodes was the original lawyer. He's the one who incorporated it. And then they may have, he may have incorporated it in Illinois. I don't really recall.
The reason I want to know is wish I know, then I can go take a picture for history.
I see.
Or the Office of American Board of Vascular Surgery in Chicago.
I'm naked on that one. I don't know.
I have a T-shirt that says ABVS on it. I can send you that.
Take a picture.
Coming back to the beginning, are you considered the pioneer in your profession?
Oh no. Actually, the association management industry, which is what we are, was started in Philadelphia by a gentleman who had a hardware store, and he
Just right in the garage, right?
yeah, and he found that there were other hardware stores that were having problems with regulations and so on, and he started to represent them, and that grew into a business that he got rid of his hardware store, and developed the association management industry, and this goes back to I think the early teens, so I wasn't a pioneer.
In your time, what were so many presidents? You have any memorable experience or moment that you remember you can tell us
That I
about?
can repeat.
Uh-oh.
Well, I mean, if you look at the variety of people, as I've talked about Sterling, you talk about John Oxner. John Oxner, there are a number of stories that I can't repeat, and he's been a good friend for all these years, and still is. I can't single out anybody because it was such a, you get into a relationship with a president of an organization, and I recall vividly a gastroenterologist by the name of Gene Overholt out of Tennessee, who said to me, during that year, I thought you were my best friend. And the day after I completed the term, you didn't know me. And I said, that's not true. I said, but I have to, you have to devote so much time and energy to one person for that period of time. And there were those that became good friends when sitting beside you. There were those that I just ran into Tom Riles down in the lobby. These are people, the Frank Spencers of the world, whom I still see. They're the Jimmy Yaos of the world. I remember Jimmy coming into program committee meetings with more paper than we had on the table. And people would start talking about a particular paper, and he'd say, here, this is where it was presented earlier. And he had the whole thing, he had everything aced. And I'll never forget that. I mean, you did more homework than anybody. But,
rather than has-been, the terminology I've heard recently, it's much better to say once was.
Or was been.
What's been, yeah.
Well, Bill Baker was a lot of fun. I mean,
Back to John Oxner just for a minute,
Yeah.
and let's see again for the historical facts, if I remember it correctly, but it was joint counsel when he stood up and supported by you and said, do you know if you own your own journal, you can make as much as $25,000 a year? And we all grabbed the table and said, man, that's a phenomenal amount of money. And that's when John said the Society for Thoracic Surgery had made a deal with Mosby, and they were getting $25,000 a year, and that's sort of the start. Is that correct?
Yeah, and the last contract we did with thoracic surgery was slightly over $1 million a year.
Yeah.
And vascular, the Journal of Vascular Surgery has to. I don't know what your arrangement is, but I'm sure it's a major
Major,
income source.
Right.
The thing, and that's you have to find ways to generate revenue that the IRS is going to allow, and that's one of the nonprofit situations. And you can't go out and sell things to make money. You have to go out and have a vehicle which is going to produce educational material and generate revenue for you.
Well, what I would say is one of the pleasures of being in the executive committee was working with Bill and his group. And many times I think the fact that you had been managing different organizations, you had some collective wisdom that helped guide us, and you were always extraordinarily careful to keep the boundaries. And I marveled at how you did that. But yet you would say, well, I've got a client organization that has done this. And I found it extraordinarily helpful. And at the time, particularly when I was secretary, it would have, and we've all been officers of other smaller organizations. We ran them out of our own offices. It would have been absolutely impossible to do it without the wonderful work that I think you and your people did. And all of the people in your group, I thought were quite helpful, very professional, and did an extraordinary job. And I think you'll recall maybe one of the first retreats that the group had was outside of Chicago someplace. And one of the issues that got brought up was, how long are you going to work, and what's going to happen when you retire?
I'll let you know when it happens.
Yeah, right.
Well, I appreciate that. I've been very fortunate with the people. The staff, with one exception, had been very committed to the client organizations, and committed to the company and to me personally. And for that, I've been very, very grateful. Even today, when I no longer own the company that's been sold. I shave on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Fortunately, today is a Thursday, and go to the office, and I'm dealing directly with certain clients on behalf of the company now, rather than behalf of myself. But you always have to have something to do. And this is what I've made my life out of, and it's what I enjoy, and being able to interact with bright. I used to use the phrase, my clients are all very highly educated, often beyond their level of intelligence. It's been a joy on my side to be able to deal with the Jerry Goldstones, the John Norton Riches, the Jimmy Yaos, John Town, who was going to be here. These are people that I learned an awful lot from, and I hope I help in some small way.
There's no question you have made a lot of positive difference in our development.
Well, you can fool some of the people all the time,
And we really thank you for all your help.
Well, I have to thank you all. I mean, you've enabled me to have a business and a life that when I was a 17-year-old applying only to Harvard, I never envisioned having. And but it's been a great experience on my part.
For the history tape, I'm going to take a good look for your advice, see how we can make it a little bit different and better.
You asked, and I give. So,
I thank you for that.
Sorry.
Any more questions?
No, did you discuss at all the issue of the international ISCVS and that whole episode of history?
Well, the international was we didn't talk about that, but the international was a totally different ball game, and it was strictly to run a World Congress every other year, in some faraway enchanted land, and we ran it in Kyoto. We did it in Melbourne and Sydney, and we did it in Monte Carlo, Rio de Janeiro. I mean, but it was strictly an international conference. There wasn't much business aspect. There weren't many business aspects to it, which there would be, such as your board or such as a journal for them. And I think that fell by the wayside about the same time because of the same individual I had hired, and it sort of unraveled in the early 2000s. So that because it was one of the things I thoroughly enjoy. You're going to be interviewing Taki Ballas,
Yeah.
We did the meeting in Athens, and I remember Taki Ballas and very, very well. And
He's here.
what?
He's here.
Yeah, and that was such an experience, and you go into a different country, a different language, a different world, and trying to make things work, where you have to come up with a projectionist who speaks something other than Greek.
Well, my question's prompted by the fact that now the SVS has all these international chapters. It's almost like we've rediscovered the wheel. I mean, do
Okay.
you have a comment on that, or?
I'm not familiar with all of your chapters. That is,
Well, there's
that's
a
something-
large push to have more international members, to make it a global society, basically. And it seems to me like we're recreating what we once had, which is fine. I enjoyed the international aspects to it as well. And I was sorry to see that part of it go away, but I agree it was kind of artificial. You had two organizations, and one had a meeting every couple of years, and one was doing more other things. But
we have one client organization that is now putting together programs and then exporting them. And this is thoracic surgery. So we've done a mitral valve conclave in Japan. We've done them, and this one just went on in Spain. And what we're doing is exporting the program, take the whole thing in, and put it on that part of the world. We're going to be in Istanbul in September. And this is not to develop chapters, but it's it increases the membership, because people in those parts of the world want to become members of the organization. But it exports information and science, which is the purpose of the organization. And these have done very, very well. We've done them in concert with Japanese Association for Thoracic Surgery. In Istanbul, there are several local organizations that we're working with, but that's it's a very successful venture.
You know, part of the question for Dr. Goldstone really involved the Société Internationale de Chirurgie, or the International Surgical Society.
Yeah.
And, the big contest was...
Martin Algover.
Should they
Martin.
be together or not
Yeah.
together? I think the last combined meeting we had was San Francisco about 1979.
That was the last.
Bill
combined
Blakemore
one.
tried to explain that to me, and he said there's some very powerful cardiothoracic surgeons, we'll pick on them again, in Europe that don't want to be part of the Société, if you will, which had existed since 1902, I think. The reason I bring it up, too, I went to their meeting in Helsinki last September, and they had about 2,800 people from 82 nations. So they're certainly alive and well. And many of us kind of lamented the fact that we lost that connection, because we could have a couple of days of vascular, but we could also see our friends in other specialties that we really didn't see otherwise. And do you have any comments about that relationship or those contests with Martin Algover?
Yeah, with the contest with Martin Algover and Victor Birchie,
Yeah.
who is still involved in it, I believe. The San Francisco meeting was the one that split, and we went from the first ISCVS meeting was held in Monaco and Monte Carlo, and after 2 years after that, there was just no interaction from that point forward.
Yeah.
Martin was a very difficult person to work with, but that's water over the dam.
Right. Sure.
Yeah.
Well, we have John Tang here, and he would like to ask Bill for a couple questions. John.
Well, Bill, it's good to see you again.
Yes, sir.
We went through a very interesting time at the end of the last century and the first couple of years of this one, when John Porter and I were the two presidents, and you were the executive director. And I just wonder if you could just reminisce a little bit about the irascible, wonderful John Porter.
He was both irascible and wonderful. John Porter was a unique human being, and sitting up there in the far northwestern part of the country, he at times seemed to think he wasn't part of the world. I remember somebody telling me the story when he was a resident. They were sitting in their they were catching a little bit of a nap, and he would be lying there smoking a cigarette, and he'd get it down to the very tip end, and then he'd just throw it off into the floor, and he would do that all day, every day. They would have to come in and clean the room each time. And I told John about it one time, and he said, "It's nobody's business." It's the precise answer you would expect from him. He was very opinionated. He was very committed. He was committed to the organization, and it was one of those joyful experiences because there was no bull with John Porter. What you saw, you got, and I thoroughly enjoyed him and his attempt to convince us all to buy wine from Oregon. He used to sit at dinners. We go out to dinner, and he made sure that the ice bucket with the wine was beside him, and he'd sit there with his hand in the ice bucket and play with the ice bucket for the whole thing. A great human being.
Well, John was a good friend of David Lett, and David Lett started Irie Vineyards, and in the Willamette Valley was the first Oregon winemaker. And actually, David talked at John's funeral. So John was very connected with the wine, and one of the funny things, to start talking about Porter, is I was invited up to speak at the Vascular Society there, and I wanted John to meet my brother-in-law, who has St. Innocent's Winery. So it was a big deal, and when you did, he got the ceremonial car out. John had this big Mercedes, the big one. And so we get in the, quote, ceremonial car, and off we go. We're leaving Portland, driving to Salem, Oregon. And we get there, and I introduced him, and I actually had given him my brother-in-law's wine, because John Porter was somebody that, had to know who my brother-in-law was. And it was, we go into the winery, in the room where all the big tanks are, sat John down, because John always had to sit. Mm-hmm. And I was the guy who was like, he gave this kid oral exams. And of course, he was happy to do it. I mean, but it was just like the old days.
Pure John.
But yeah, those are good times.
Yeah.
We all love John Porter.
Yeah.
We miss him.
For sure.
Well, I think
Thank you.
come to the end for me to say thank you, Bill.
Well, thank you very
for
much
coming, and
I'm honored to be part of this process.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.